Jen, walk us through how this trip went and what we actually learned from it and what Zelensky said.
Right, Guy. You mentioned those strikes that we heard earlier today. Our understanding is that Zelensky's trip is actually going to be expedited just given that situation. But more than anything, analysts are looking at this trip as it being somewhat symbolic, a thawing of relations, if you could say, between these two nations. We saw President Ramaphosa of South Africa lead a peace mission of African leaders just about 2 years ago to Ukraine. But in that time, we saw many African nations somewhat feeling the pressure to have to pick a side within this conflict. And of course, you zero into times now. Greg was just talking to you about the pressure that Zelensky and Ukraine is facing from the U.S. South Africa, of course, in a very different context, is also facing pressure from the U.S. So perhaps this is an opportunity for these two sides to level set. What we heard from President Zelensky on X, he says he wants to use South Africa's role as G20 president to ensure active engagements by member countries towards diplomatic efforts. And if we just look at President Ramaphosa, he has at least tried to assert himself as a mediator to a certain extent. I mentioned that 2023 trip by African leaders. He is, of course, leading the role as the presidency of the G20 and has at least tried to put forward that he can speak to both sides. And so potentially he is able to negotiate something within these two leaders. We understand that President Ramaphosa actually spoke to Vladimir Putin earlier this week. And so, analysts aren't expecting there to be any dramatic or massive developments in terms of peace and negotiations, because, of course, there are those negotiations happening in Europe. But potentially, President Ramaphosa can use this opportunity to, again, assert his role that he is trying to put forward as a neutral stance, a mediator, and potentially look to other opportunities where these two sides can meet in the middle, especially after the past few years of a bit of a rocky relationship.